Matt is working. Ron, can you turn yours on?
Okay, it's showing.
Excellent. That's okay. We're all up and running. Momentary glitch. So good afternoon all and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's Cabinet meeting of the 25th of January 2024. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and Chair of the meeting as the leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. We'll be using the Council's hybrid platform today, and so just our few usual reminders. The meeting's being live streamed and recorded and will be uploaded to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's website as soon as practicable after the meeting. And also, all participants should ensure that if not participating in person in the chamber, that their microphone is not activated and that remote attendees mute themselves. We're not speaking to avoid any background noise or feedback coming through. If anyone wishes to speak, they should either activate their respective request to speak function or use the hand raise function if attending remotely. Obviously, just put your hand up in the chamber as well. All debate should be raised verbally and not via the chat function. So for the sake of the recording, the chat function is used solely to highlight any technical issues or to get the attention of the chair or democratic services officer. So we'll do an update a little bit as we go on because we've got a couple of urgent items, but I will deal with those when we get to them. They've been circulated to all members in advance. So just call up the relevant papers. So today, agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, and I believe we're all here. There's 5 of us in the meeting, and we have 3 online. So yes, no apologies for absence. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of January, and if I can take those as a true reflection of the meeting, I'll move.
And I'll second those, Leader.
Thank you. No dissent. Agenda item 3 is to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interest. I'm not aware of any declarations, and I'm checking with the Democratic Services Officer.
No declarations formally received for this meeting, Leader. Thank you.
Super, thank you. So moving on to references, we've got a couple of references here. First of all, agenda item 4 is a reference from Governance and Audit Committee on the 11th of December 2023 in relation to the corporate fraud enforcement policy. I am going to suggest that we note the report for now and we deal with it with agenda item 11 later on in the agenda. So I'd move.
And I'll second that.
Super, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, that's a reference in relation to the draft transgender inclusion toolkit and guidance document for schools and other settings. This was a reference that went to learning and culture scrutiny, and from there on to corporate performance and resources scrutiny. Again, that reference has been circulated to all members more recently. So I believe that Rhiannon's online and she's going to take this reference.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the transgender toolkit went out for discussion and for contributions last spring. And so this report is to advise the scrutiny committee of the findings of that consultation. And have a look. First of all, I'd like to say that the report shows the importance of the consultation period because changes were made to the document as a result of the responses that were received by various groups, which were parents, teachers, young people themselves, and groups that were approached for their input, such as youth forums and so forth. So, in recognising social, political and legal context and that these changes over time, and more recently, the Council has been progressing this review, which is what brought it about as an update of the previous one. So the consultation was January the 23rd to March the 17th of last year. When we commenced it, the existing toolkit at that time was withdrawn, but the Council continued to work to safeguard all groups of pupils and students and provide students with support and schools with support on a case-by-case basis. Generally referred to as by schools, because it is, after all, schools that approached us for this guidance in the first place. It's not something that the Council decided it ought to do without any consultation from anyone else. We were approached by schools and teachers who were meeting these situations in school and wanted guidance on how to approach them, because there is not, after all, an instinctive way to behave in these circumstances. So all the responses were subject to carefully considered evaluation and amendment. And as I've said, changes were made to the document. For example, the need for parental involvement, except where that would have been to the detriment of the child. Changes are not made now without consultation with parents. More support for schools, because it is, after all, they who approached us for this in the first place, and safeguarding officer being involved and so forth. And the watch and wait policy, so that no decisions are made immediately. There is always time to wait and see what happens, because children can change. Children and young people can change dramatically, rapidly, in all sorts of ways over a couple of years. And so no immediate decisions are made about anything. And those are the changes that were made as a result of the responses that we received. So it's also been to corporate parenting, and it went to corporate performance and resources last week, where responses were accepted from councillors who obviously had been approached by members of their constituencies. So the recommendations are that the Cabinet considers and notes the result of the content of the consultation responses, the revised transgender toolkit and guidance document for schools and other settings, and there are no more recommendations. We are accepting it as is. So the report and appendices are included. So I'd like people to note this, please, with all of the changes that have been made.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that. I'm also wondering, actually, having watched this report go through various iterations, going through scrutiny, etc., whether or not we should add our gratitude to officers for their consummate professionalism and in-depth knowledge and the work that they've put into the development of this report. So are you happy to add that in? And I think we've got Eddie that wants to come in as well. Hang on, shall I come off there?
Thank you, Leader. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Right, yeah, just to support what's just been said. It has gone through quite a rigorous journey to get to this point, and we're thankful of all the contributions, particularly as you've said, Leader, the officers, the work that they've done through this. Through scrutiny, some of the challenges, quite rightly so, they're there to scrutinise, was about the methodology and the recording of the people that put their comments in, and it was quite clear that there were some that just weren't able to be printed. So on that basis, they're not printed, but council members were able to have a look at those and to see for themselves. And just as the officers indicated, most people supported the toolkit, and the changes that were made are recorded as from the original document. Quite a considerable number of changes, and also importantly that young people were actually involved in this consultation as well. So really pleased how this come forward. It has taken a bit longer, and quite rightly, we would like to wait to see what the Welsh Government's format is going to be. But as with all these things, this is live now, so we need to move forward with it until that comes forward. So you've already seconded it, but I just wanted to reiterate. It did go to, it was going to go to corporate parents panel, but unfortunately the papers weren't available, but the members of the corporate parents panel were able to see the reports as they were in the scrutiny, and there weren't any other feedback on that. So I'm content to support this as in full. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. So we've got Rhiannon that moved it. I've seconded it. Everybody's in agreement. Yes. So thank you. Moving on, sort of getting the agenda back on my screen. We now have a number of reports of meetings. The first one is the Glamorgan Heritage Coast Advisory Group. And I used to be a member of this group, and it's a really super committee to be on, because you get to hear all sorts of details about the Heritage Coast. And I can see that that looking at this, they gave updates on the relevant conservation work that had been done. There was also an update on countryside access, and something else, the maintenance work that had been undertaken on parts of the coast path, and also where they needed to roll the path back inland slightly because of sort of landslips, etc. There was an update from Bridgend County Council, so it's interesting to see what they're doing as well. So for anyone that's interested in that, in their work, it's an interesting report to have a look at. That's here for us to note. So on that basis, I would move that we note.
And I'll second those.
Thank you. The agenda item 7 is the report of the corporate parenting panel on the 13th of November last year. And as chair, I'll hand over to Eddie for this.
Thank you, Leader. The minutes themselves, for me, chairing the meeting, it was an excellent meeting. You can see from the officers involved that they all have a part to play. There were 4 case studies that were brought forward in this as part of the Justice and Early Support Service, and presentation by Chris Carroll, one of the officers dealing with it. And it's quite clear that although there are some offending, there is a lot of background to that, and some of it's outside the control of the young people that we're talking about. But much of it is close to hand. One case in particular was the father of the child was actually the perpetrator and the person that was causing the individual to be in the Youth Justice Service in the first place. Thankfully, that was worked through. And as a result of the work that was done by the Youth Justice Service on all 4 cases, the children and the families that's part of that had better life chances. And this is another case of where the early prevention will stop the cycle of longer term issues. I would love to give the details on this, but unfortunately, clearly, as a competence of the individuals, it wouldn't be fair. But I would like to, just to indicate that the working from all the departments, including housing, social services, and children's services, it was just excellent to see it working in conjunction with the Youth Justice Service. So I'd like to move this report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm happy to second that we note as well. Thanks, Eddie. The final meeting report that we have today is agenda item 8, and that's the Shared Regulatory Services Joint Committee. So over to you, Ruba.
Thank you, Leader. Sorry, I'm just getting my notes. Usually the December meeting of the Shared Regulatory Services would be a budget meeting, but as you'll know, Leader, because of the lateness of the settlement, we've had to push that forward. So there will in fact be a special meeting next week to finalise the budget. Having said that, these minutes cover the December meeting where we discussed the year's work and some of the good work that's taken place with SRS, the Shared Regulatory Services, and we looked at the fees and charges that we're proposing for the following year. And in terms of budget, we did discuss both in part 1 and part 2 of the meeting. We looked at some of the savings that we could make if there was under a 3% and 5%. The 3 partner authorities wanted SRS to look at those options. So we'll be finalising that budget, having talked to all 3 authorities for next week. So I would move the minutes, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you. So happy to second that we note the meeting report for Shared Regulatory Services. And no comments from anybody. Moving on again to my own report, and I have 4 today. The first one, agenda item 9, is the use of Chief Executive's emergency powers. And if you have a look at those, these are mainly housekeeping. These are the use of the powers since the last report, and that was on the 30th of November of last year. And it's things where the actual work itself has been agreed, but maybe there's a stage within it that needs to be agreed, such as an acceptance of a tender or something. Acceptance of a grant where we've had money, say for example, low carbon heat grant from Welsh Government, which was under J to provide an air source heat pump for Ysgol Bro Morgannwg. That's the primary side of the school, etc. So these are fairly straightforward and something that we basically normally note. So on that basis, I would just note that we, or move that we note the use of Chief Executive's emergency powers.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. And everyone's happy with that? Yeah. Agenda item 10, this is levelling up and long-term plan for the town, long-term plan for town update report. And in some ways, it seeks to clarify the current situation with funding that was announced towards the end of last year. And it's looking at the Shared Prosperity Fund, long-term plans for town funding, and also the Levelling Up Fund, barrier making waves funding that was awarded in November of last year. The report mentions the last report to Cabinet in terms of shared prosperity, and that was on the 5th of October. And which updated Cabinet on the decisions taken to date in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund. And I think it's fair to say that arrangements for that have moved ahead a lot, and you'll see within the budget planning, etc., that various things are funded via the Shared Prosperity Fund. But also it gives details in terms of the funding that was allocated to 55 towns across the UK, and Barry is one of those, in which we receive it's a sort of an endowment style fund of £20 million over 10 years. And that is a 25% revenue and 75% capital split. So there are restrictions in terms of what we can spend the funding for, not only in terms of said revenue capital. It also means that there are 3 investment themes that funding has to meet. That's safety and security, high streets, heritage and regeneration, and transport and connectivity. And these are all important within Barry, and how it's spent will be determined by a town board. And so a town board will inform the decisions. But I think some people have sort of said, well, where are the details? And you say, well, actually, we won't see a penny of this probably until next autumn. So there's work to be done in terms of developing a town board, setting out the plan for town board. That town board then develops a plan and it's submitted against the funding, and hopefully then that will come through, that will be agreed by the Department of Levelling Up, and we will start to see that coming through next autumn. So to do things properly, you need to take a bit of time, but it's certainly not in the Vale Bank account by any means yet. The report outlines what the programme is going to be in terms of recruiting the town board and how that will go forward. The town also talks, the report also talks about the Levelling Up Round 3 award, which we were notified of at the end of last year, and where we will receive 19.85 million to progress the plan that we put forward. Again, we have to work through that plan to make sure that it actually fits the current needs of the town. And there are people, there's been a lot of discussion about the proposed marina, and people saying, will that solve all the challenges that Barry faces? Well, it probably won't. It probably won't. It's part of the mix, and this is all part of a generation mix. If I'm talking personally, I'm probably more excited about the Community Water Sports Centre, because that links in with the proposed development of the Cardiff and Vale College on the marina, provides facilities for community organisations, etc. But that will all come out in the mix. So the next step to progress the Barry Making Waves project will also be outlined for agreement by Cabinet, including the need to actually reassess the economic outputs of the scheme, because, as we know, things have changed and continue to change over time in terms of the UK and Welsh economy. As a reassurance, people might ask, well, why is there not a recommendation to take this to scrutiny? This is an update report. Barry members will be updated, and there will be update meetings for Barry members, because actually this is something that Barry members need to have more control over, rather than the sort of wider membership of the council. So we'll take that forward in that way. There are 9 recommendations here, which are over 1.5 pages, and page 3 through to page 4. I don't intend to read them all for us. They haven't changed. So if I can move the recommendations 1 to 9 as set out on pages 3 to 4, I'd move.
And I'm delighted to second those recommendations, Leader, and look forward to development of this plan.
I was going to say, I would imagine you would be absolutely delighted. And I can't see any one coming in from elsewhere, so that's super. Right, so then we go on to agenda item 11, if I can bring that up. And this fits in with the reference from that I mentioned earlier from Governance and Audit Committee at agenda item 4, where they discussed this policy, and it, apart from forwarding it on to us, they recommended that it should be amended to include commentary that investigations should be carried out or led by officers with the appropriate training and or experience. And while I think that that's probably a given, it's worth stating. So I'm going to add on that we agree that. So in effect, the counter fraud strategy and framework it is part of the council's commitment to prevent all forms of fraud, bribery and corruption, and it ensures that the council can apply a full range of sanctions. The sanctions will be governed by the principles of the policy and will specifically cover a whole range of things. So that's things like welfare fraud, such as council tax reduction, social housing fraud and any other fraud investigated by the Regional Internal Audit Service, and it also covers elected members and council staff. So it's an all-encompassing policy. As I said, it has been fully discussed by the Governance and Audit Committee, who were happy and supported it with that one amendment. So I'm happy that there's nothing further that we can add to the deliberations of the Governance and Audit Committee, and so would look at the two recommendations that Cabinet considers and approves the corporate fraud enforcement policy attached to Appendix A to this report, and that the report is referred to full council to amend the officer delegation in the Constitution in accordance with paragraph 2.4 and 2.8. And I'm just checking with the Democratic Services Officer that do we need to add in a third that the narrative is changed to reflect the need for suitably qualified officers, or is that already been made?
We can add that in as an extra
That'd be good.
recommendation if you'd like to read it. It's no problem at all.
Super. So with those three recommendations, I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. Again, looking at everyone, that's fine. On to agenda item 12, and this is the disposal of freehold interest in 119 Broad Street, Barry. And that's the official title, but actually, as most people would know, 119 Broad Street, Barry, well, a lot of people would know, that is actually half of the premises that is occupied by the Cardiff and Vale Citizens Advice Bureau. One half they already own, and they lease the other half from the council. And so when there were discussions about the current lease, there was then discussion as to whether or not it would be possible for the tenant, i.e. the Cardiff Vale Citizens Advice Bureau, to purchase a freehold interest in the building. And if for anyone who doesn't know where it is, it's outlined in red on the attached plan at Appendix A. The Citizens Advice Bureau's been the tenant of the building since 1999, and currently receives a grant from the council, which is intended in part to cover the annual rental. I think at this point it's worth saying that the work that is undertaken by a Citizens Advice Bureau has been absolutely fundamental to the support that we've been trying to provide to residents of the Vale, certainly since the start of the pandemic, but also before. The partnership is very strong, and we know that we can have open conversations with them. The property, we're looking at it, the property is surplus to the council's requirements, and so therefore we would recommend it for disposal, and to see whether or not we can accede to their request. Any disposal of the freehold would also be subject to the council receiving best consideration for the land, so we have to be very clear in terms of any financial dealings. And accordingly, the freehold interest that we're discussing will be required to be determined by an external valuer, and other terms and conditions being agreed. The terms and conditions of the sale will require the purchaser to pay the council's costs associated with the disposal, and that also includes the cost of the valuation. So it's fairly straightforward. A tenant wants to have a more permanent arrangement with the building. We're happy to work with them to that end, if that's at all possible. So we just got 3 very straightforward recommendations ahead of us, and that's firstly that the freehold interest in 119 Broad Street, Barry, be declared surplus to the council's requirements and disposed of to the council's tenants, Cardiff and Vale Citizens Advice Bureau Limited. 2, that delegated authority is granted to the head of finance, section 151 officer, to agree terms and conditions for the disposal of the freehold interest in the property, as shown edged red on the plan, Appendix 1, by the most appropriate means, in consultation with the monitoring officer, head of legal and democratic services, subject to the disposal being at market valuation. And finally, that Cabinet authorises the monitoring officer, head of legal and democratic services, to prepare, complete and execute all appropriate legal documentation required to dispose of the freehold interest in the property at the appropriate time. And I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. Everyone happy? Yeah. And then we move on to agenda item 13, which is for the Cabinet Member of Social Care and Health. This is a Part 1 report, and subsequently at agenda item 15 there will be a Part 2 report. So handing over to Eddie.
Thank you, Leader. This report makes a case for the council purchasing 3 properties for our additional needs, and we're going to be funding that by applying for grants from the Welsh Government Housing and Care Fund, and it's anticipated this fund will come through via the Regional Partnership Board to support the purchase and any renovation works that are required. There's much more detail in the Part 2 report due to the confidential nature of the residences that we'll be purchasing. So I move the recommendations which are the contents of this report be noted in connection with the Part 2 report later on in the meeting agenda. And secondly, that the Cabinet notes the urgency procedure as set out in section 15.14 of the Council's Constitution be used in respect of recommendations contained within the Part 2 report. That's a move.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Eddie. I'm very happy to second that, and I can see nodding heads around me as well. So yes, that's all agreed. So agenda item 14 is any items which the chair has decided are urgent, and I do have one. I don't know, Eddie, are you still on? Have you still got your microphone on? Super. And we have one which has been circulated to all members, and that is it comes under agenda item 14.1, and that's the Vale Glamorgan Enterprise Centre, and this is a report of the Deputy Leader. So handing over to you, Bronwyn.
Okay, thank you very much. This report is is in relation to the Vale of Glamorgan Enterprise Centre, which is commonly known as the VEC. Now, the centre's been operated by the council as a business centre with basic workshops in there and offices at a lower than market rental. Now, due to its age, it is old and it's beyond economic repair, and to date it's mainly vacant now. And obviously, with that, then comes the buildings are coming to deteriorating even further, and they're coming to their end of their physical life, really. Now, even though we lease the building, the repair obligations actually fall under us, under the terms of this lease with Hexion, which is also known as Bakelite as well. Now, the lease was originally signed in 1997 and it was renewed then in 2009. However, it doesn't actually expire until the 19th of April 2045. Now, as I've just referred to, there are some serious issues with the centre, and if you look at under item 2 or paragraph 2, which are the key issues for consideration, you can see them listed there from 2.2 to 2.6, where you've got the roofs, the energy performance certificates, fireproofing, site maintenance and site constraints, and that actually does read for some quite stark reading there about the works that would actually be needed to bring it up to standard for, so that's actually fit for purpose. So I'm not going to read through everything there, but it is worth looking at the costings and actually the works that actually need to be done to that. I've actually got a part 2 report as well, which goes in relation to this, but this is the part 1 report. And I've got 3 recommendations for us today. So the first one is that Cabinet consider the strategic options for the Vale Enterprise Centre, that the contents of the report be noted and considered in connection with the part 2 report on this agenda, and then that the use of urgent decision procedure as set out in section 1514 of the Council Constitution be used in respect of recommendations contained within the part 2 report, which we will come to in due course. So I'd like to move those recommendations, Leader.
Thank you, and happy to second. And everybody's in agreement as well, so that's fine. So that's the conclusion of the part 1 agenda. We do have 2 items for discussion on today's agenda under part 2, and that's the agenda item 15 linked to agenda item 13 and agenda item 14. Agenda item 16.1 linked into 14.1. So these are matters that are to be considered to be confidential, and therefore the meeting will need to move into private session where confidential matters can be discussed under part 2. Therefore, I will ask for Cabinet to agree to move to part 2 and ask the Cabinet Officer to stop the recording of this open session to ensure that no members of the public are present after this point, and only allow relevant parties to remain to hear the details of the items to be discussed. Following the meeting, the outcome of the part 2 discussions will be formally captured as part of the minutes of the meeting and will advise all parties of the final decisions of the Cabinet for the relevant items. So if I can formally move part 2.
And I'll second that, Leader.
Thank you. And ask the Cabinet Officer to ensure that we only have relevant parties in the meeting from this point on, and for the live stream and recording to be stopped. And if you could confirm when that's happened, thank you.